Disc Creatures is an indie monster taming game released in October of 2019 with a strong stylistic emphasis that aims to capture the look of early pixel graphics, particularly the era of the Game Boy and Game Boy Color. If you're a fan of retro styles, Pokemon, or the monster taming genre, I think this game will pique your interest. Disc Creatures was entirely created by solo developer SATTO of PICORINNE Soft and published by Dangen Entertainment. The game uses the RPG Maker engine, but all the assets and audio are created solely by SATTO. No surprise to anyone, the game uses turn-based combat. Combat is 3 versus 3, with your creatures visible only as little portrait sprites, alongside their HP and energy. Each creature species also has 1 or 2 elements, as well as a set of typical JRPG stats that affect how they battle. Much of the game consists of exploring, battling, and collecting with these creatures. Creatures are beings with magical powers, from the smallest to the largest, and yet all are sapient as well as sentient. Some can talk, build, and live amongst humans, while others live in the wilderness. These specific creatures are not used by people in battle, rather specially licensed individuals known as Disc Rangers, or Discers for short, will copy the data of wild creatures by defeating them. These copies are burned to a disc, hence the game's title, which generates a copy of the creature in the real world. These copies cannot speak, but they are still very much alive. Keep this distinction in mind as it's quite important. Normal creatures can talk, the copy creatures you collect and battle with cannot. That's just a very brief overview, but we'll be going a lot more in depth through this video, and there's a lot to talk about. First, allow me to give a formal introduction. My name is Hadel, and welcome to a review and analysis for Disc Creatures. This is the first video I've made of this long format style of YouTube video, so please forgive any amateurishness in its presentation or editing quality. I've been working on this project for over a year at time of recording, so despite my best efforts, I may make some mistakes. Do feel free to let me know about any such mistakes, or if you have any advice to share. It's been an off and on project being balanced between a full-time job and other hobbies. I'll offer one spoiler warning now, and I recommend playing the game before watching this review, just so you can form your own perspective first. If you'd rather see the review first, that's perfectly fine. I've done my best to organize this information in a logical manner, though if necessary, I'll have to go on tangents or reference other aspects of not just Disc Creatures, but other games as well. Something also important to note is that comparisons to Pokemon are inevitable, even with established franchises such as Digimon or Yokai Watch. Despite being dwarfed by the financial powerhouse of Pokemon's brand, many of these franchises are successes in their own right. I doubt anyone could reasonably deny that. I have always felt that the needless comparison to Pokemon or the Pokemon killer label, particularly given by journalists, have been unfair, so you can imagine my frustration when such comparisons to smaller games happen. But in this case, it would be heavily dishonest to claim Disc Creatures does not take inspiration from Pokemon. So in my attempt to review Disc Creatures on its own terms, I will refrain from comparing it to Pokemon unless I absolutely feel it's necessary. To hold a solo developer indie game to the standard of the largest media franchise in the world currently just seems unfair. But yes, I kept you waiting long enough. Let's dive in. The premise starts us in a world of humans and creatures alike, who seem to have discovered each other in recent history. There's no concrete date I'm aware of, but based upon some particular NPC dialogue, it couldn't have been more than a generation or two. You, the protagonist, are a young boy living in a town called Lyceum Town. Despite your age, you pass the Discer exam and are licensed to be a Disc Ranger, which lawfully allows you to command creatures, through the use of a device called a Disc Kid. Discers are tasked with the responsibility of solving problems not just around Lyceum Town, but also surrounding areas. Townspeople will post problems or tasks on a town bulletin board, which the player accepts like a quest. The game is split into episodes, with each of these quests functioning as the episode's main story. Some of these episodes will have 1 or 2 small side objectives that need completing in order to achieve the main goal. These objectives are never recorded or written in any sort of quest log. The player is expected to explore, but your objectives are very easy to follow along with. It should be noted that any new locations or cities you reach can be revisited after you unlock them via the story. Overall, each episode progresses in a very linear way in terms of events, which will be more evident once we dive more into the story. Before the first episode truly starts, however, you have to choose your starters. Many monster taming series will present the player with one or more starters. For example, Pokemon has you choose one from 3, Digimon World 3 has you choose a team of 3, Fossil Fighters Champions has you choose one from 4, etc. Disc Creatures has you choose 3 from a pool of 5 different elemental types. These types include a fire, water, grass, earth, and electric starter creature. These are presented to you as soon as you obtain your Discer license. There really isn't a better time to talk about this, but if you'll forgive the segue, I'd like to talk about the creature designs themselves. For many people, it's an important part of their interest in any monster taming game. All I can really do is describe their style and offer my personal perspective. Within the game's pixel art visual style, creature designs vary greatly. Initially, the creatures you find will be very small, and as the game progresses, you'll find creatures often increase in size and complexity. Creatures vary from resembling real-world animals and plant life to the machine-like and abstract. Just to name a few examples, Centipion and Bladegwyn are quite clearly based on a centipede and penguin. Then you have others like Quadslayer or Cryptod, which seem to be some sort of centaur, praying mantis metal thing, and a flying skyfish newt cyclops thing. Most creatures do follow a recognizable influence, however. Overall, many of the creature designs can be quite geometric in that they are formed from simple shapes. This is particularly apparent in the early game, where creatures are often round, circular, or cubic. As the game goes on, you'll find creatures becoming more visually complex with a variety of appendages, shapes, sizes, and themes. However, many of the late game creatures still have bodies made from simple geometric shapes. Personally, I find that the way SATTO designed his creatures fits well with the style of the game itself. Especially in the early game, creatures to me have this inorganic, medical look about them. When I say medical, I mean that they remind me of illustrations, mascots, or characters I've seen in places like dentist offices or clinics as a child in the late 90s and early 2000s. Perhaps it is their roundness combined with strong, simple color palettes that gives them a vitamin-like appearance. 4 of the 5 starters, for example, are essentially spheres or made from spheres, and many others like Tomatii, Spook, Snowskers, Skulltan all have very spherical silhouettes. Some give off the dentist office feeling more than others. Shiny teeth in me. I know what I just described is very abstract and difficult to explain. Obviously, there are other creatures with various shapes and sizes. It's just a feeling I couldn't shake during my extensive time with the game, and I hope in even some small way that you understand this concept. Overall, I personally find the creatures appealing, and there's a consistent design style to all of them. I like them a lot, Tormentula being a personal favorite. It isn't just the creature design that I find appealing, to be honest, it's the entire visual style of the game. As mentioned before, Disc Creatures uses a retro pixel art style very reminiscent of games found on the original Game Boy and Game Boy Color. Despite using RPG Maker for its engine, it seems the entire look of the game uses unique assets and sprite work done by SATTO himself. I'm honestly impressed by how consistent everything is. Each creature's individual color palette is one from a pre-made set of palettes that span the entire game's look. Each of these palettes use the same 3 colors for various values of lights and darks. Take a look at the sprites for Flame Orb, Tomatii, and Prominence. Each uses a reddish-orange color palette, all with the same colors. Glassshell and Nefariant each have a grayish color palette that uses some desaturated pink, which gives a metallic or rocky look to certain creatures. This extends to most, if not every creature, as well as many of the environments, props, and other assets. Technology in this world looks very much like old Web 1.0 electronics. The diskette itself looks so much like a Game Boy. The actual color choices made in-game for the environments also reinforce that medical feel I got from the creature designs. I feel this particularly in the indoor areas like disc cafes, town hall, and other urban areas. The game uses a lot of white as negative space, even the ground, and at first I found it intense on the eyes. Combined with a crisp bitmap font for the game's typeface, and it has a clean look with a lot of contrast. As you reach new areas, places like Pistaport and Mount Azel are almost completely saturated in color, however. Looking back, I think the heavy use of sharp whites and blacks with mostly desaturated color choices gives it such a unique and memorable presentation. I can't imagine the game being some sort of neon synthwave blast to the eyes like the trend a lot of indie games seem to be following. Animations for attacks and moves of combat are simple and functional. In the Steam reviews, I had seen someone complain that the animations are too fast and it's hard to see what's happening at times, which I can understand. It was something I definitely noticed as well during my first playthrough. While some would prefer faster animations for faster combat encounters, I can see why stretching out some frames on the attack animations could help some players with visibility and even flavor, honestly. God knows I love Pokemon Coliseum, XD, and Battle Revolution's combat animations for the dynamism they bring, even if a common complaint is that they're too long. The metronome key item can change your battle speed to your preference, but I'm not sure how much this fixes the issue for players. During my Disc Coliseum grind, personally I cranked that to max, but kept it on default for normal play. The UI is such a treat to me. There's always little disc icons worked into areas for type, or sometimes simple animated illustrations of creatures worked into selectable buttons. Everything is themed around creatures and discs. Despite all of the detail, the actual readability of the UI is still there, which in the design world is critically important. The game's logo as well is consistent with the game's look. It appears to be hand-lettered, with little disc and creature illustrations worked into the letterforms. The strokes on the letterforms are rounded and blobby, giving it a fun, non-threatening, and childlike look. I believe the game's bitmap typeface is created by SATTO himself, as looking in the game files, the font files don't specify a name, just the weight. And unlike the RPG Maker default font of VL Gothic, there's no license or readme files. Overall, I love how this game looks. Obviously, if you're not a fan of pixel art, this game probably isn't going to be to your taste. Typically, I dislike minimalism as a style, as oftentimes I feel it looks too lifeless or is used as a cop-out for a rushed piece of work, or it is used to inoffensively appeal to as many people as possible, losing any sort of uniqueness in the process. Soulless, as people say. However, through the use of sharp-looking, crisp pixel art, consistent color usage and contrast, cute illustrations, and detail, I feel Disc Creatures possesses its own unique style. A visual art style that uses simplicity as a strength rather than simply being there. Something charming. I know in the discussion and journalism around this game, the nostalgia angle is thrown around quite a lot. And while I don't deny the visual presentation of Disc Creatures is made to appeal to that, it's not something I'm personally nostalgic for, as I'm just a few years too young to have been around during the Game Boy and Game Boy Color. My point basically is that the nostalgia appeal isn't the only appeal of Disc Creatures' look. It is something that still deserves to be enjoyed and appreciated in its own right. Now that I've provided a basic understanding of the game, it's time to jump into the story. Alongside a basic summary, I'll explain certain locations, characters, events, dialogue, and their significance or personal thoughts on them. I'll also be going to lengthy explanations of game mechanics and other gameplay related aspects when they become relevant, so be prepared for tangents. Once you hit that new game selection, you're immediately thrown into a black screen with a text prompt asking you to name your character, but not before an unknown speaker gives you a bit of introductory wisdom about the world of Disc Creatures. It is a simple bit of dialogue saying that living things can be both charming and dangerous, not just in our world, but also the world of Disc Creatures. A bit of a fourth wall break right off the bat, and during certain later events of this game, its meaning will be a bit more apparent. After entering their name, the player character wakes up in bed. I mentioned previously that the game obviously takes a lot of self-aware inspiration from Pokemon, and this opening scene is definitely going to feel familiar to anyone who's started up a Pokemon game. You've got the bed in the corner, a staircase leading down in one of the two top corners of a square room, a PC, TV, and dressers. A creature is moving about the room as well. This little guy, whom I am 99% sure is a Cinderace, is some sort of household pet for you or your family, as explained lightly by one of the neighbors. Nonetheless, he is a trusty companion to you throughout the game, offering direction, news, and advice through a little handheld radio. On the table lies your Discer application and submission fee, which need to be delivered to Town Hall. This serves as your first objective. The Town Hall is a short walk to the east, which allows the player to walk around and get their first taste of interacting with the world. Moving around in Disc Creatures is incredibly simple. You use the arrow keys to walk around in a tile grid world, and interactions are solely dedicated to the Z and X keys for confirming or canceling actions. Think of it like your A and B buttons, with your B button used to open the menu. It's very typical RPG Maker in fashion, and many classic handheld RPG fans should feel quite familiar with the controls. It's almost not worth mentioning. There is one thing to note. Many fans of Pokemon games have complained about the slowness of walking around in the world, and while I can't confirm 100%, it does seem like the player character moves slightly faster in the overworld than what I would normally expect from this type of game. I can explain it all I can, but I believe it's something that needs to be felt when playing. Anyway, in Lyceum Town, there are NPCs inside their boxy homes, and some wandering about who can give introductory bits of information or snippets of world building for new players. A welcoming sign describes Lyceum Town as a place where humans and creatures live in harmony, and I can believe it. There's many creatures wandering around, some sitting in or currently building their homes as regular citizens. It's a nice touch of world building. The town theme in this section is even a strange, slowed down version of itself, which seems to me to give to the town a relaxed, peaceful atmosphere. At the town hall, the clerk will accept your submission and explain the duties and tools of the Disc Rangers. You'll also be able to select your 3 starters mentioned before. After the clerk sends you off to boot up your new starters, the town theme changes to its normal, peppy version, a nice touch that mirrors the excitement that the kid protagonist is likely feeling. A quick trip home to your upstairs PC will give an explanation of the disk network system and how to generate creatures from disks. The same method you generate your starters is the same method for every creature disk you'll obtain. The disk network serves both as a Pokédex equivalent, creature storage, move selector, and provides info about stats and your individual creatures. You're only allowed up to 3 copies of one species of creature, which is an odd limitation. I assume it's a reflection to the fact that your party is limited to 3 creatures at one time, but considering the later mechanics of reincarburation and stat boosting, it seems weird to only allow 3 copies of one creature, in case they would like to keep several stat builds of the same creature species. In my playtime, I never had a reason to use more than 1 copy of a specific species of creature, aside from one encounter. Other players might have their own reasons for multiple copies, so I think I would prefer a higher cap on this limit. Options are always nice. It's not really an issue, but the limitation did surprise me. Upon returning to the town hall, you are given your official Disker license as well as a warning about the responsibility of using the powers of creatures, before being advised to check out the bulletin board for your first objective as a Disker. Upon reading the bulletin board outside, Episode 1 will truly begin. In the nearby pecan forest, curious children are being reported visiting an abandoned house and returning with wiped memories of their trip. Very mysterious, and you are tasked with getting to the bottom of it. Nearby, you'll find a disc cafe which serves a similar function to a Pokemon Center and general item shop. You'll also find a PC there, as is probably expected. As you start north towards Pecan Forest, a police officer will give you a quick tutorial battle. This will teach you about many of the battling mechanics. Out in the world, there are Diskers who will battle you, much like trainers in Pokemon and many other franchises. Honestly, having human opponents with their own monsters is such a staple in many monster taming franchises, it almost seems not worth mentioning out of expectation. The Diskers and Disc creatures will usually cough up money or items if you win. Battles with your creatures serve as the meat of the game, alongside the exploration and dungeon crawl. Like many monster taming games, you directly command your creatures. Your party will always consist of 3 creatures at maximum, and all 3 will be out on the field at the same time. There is no bench or pool of creatures to swap out aside from what's in your PC. In a similar vein to Pokemon, there is a fixed elemental type system that is mostly based on real-world logic, but it's different in a few areas. Fans of Pokemon will notice the addition of a magic type, as well as the combining of poison and ghost into one spirit type. In my opinion, this type system is quite balanced. As you can see, each type has 2 or 3 weaknesses, and 2 or 3 advantages. Types also do not resist themselves, so in certain situations I found it completely viable to use the same type of attacks on an enemy as their own type. This balance does come at a cost to the inherent logic to the type system. Water beating fire makes perfect sense, but I don't really understand how ice beats electric or magic beats stone. Personally, with these specific type interactions that function less on real logic, they were harder to memorize. However, for the sake of having a balanced system of elemental advantages and weaknesses in an RPG, I believe it is worth sacrificing some of this real-world logic. For my time with the game, no element was truly unviable, even the basic type. But obviously certain theming to the areas means that you want to bring certain elements to them. Water for the fire dungeon, electric and grass to the water dungeon, you get what I mean. As you can probably expect, there are also a myriad of status effects, buffs, and healing effects. These negative effects are called errors. The vast majority of them can be removed via items, skills, or naturally if enough time has passed, with a luck factor thrown in. There's the usual RPG staples of poison, confusion, paralysis, frenzy, sleep, and darkness, but also a few new interesting ones like Gloop, Curse, Knockdown, Underground, and Locks. Gloop is a mixture of negative effects, including a loss of defense, higher chance of being critically hit, reduced power and accuracy, and increased aggro. Curse is an effect that persistently drains the energy of a creature at a fixed rate every turn. Knocked Down functions similar to a flinch from Pokemon, essentially immobilizing it for 1 turn. It can be quite effective if you're lucky, or unlucky, to have it apply multiple turns in a row. Underground isn't necessarily a negative effect, but some creatures are faster when underground, and the attack Sand Trap inflicts double damage on underground opponents. Locks can come in power, mind, or heal versions, and temporarily disable physical, special, or healing moves respectively on the target. On top of that, there are skills that can buff allies and debuff enemies' stats and resistances to certain elements. These are also temporary and can sometimes come as a secondary effect to a damaging attack. Your creature's stats follow a typical RPG formula, with stats consisting of HP, energy, power, mind, guard, barrier, speed, and luck. Damage is split between physical and magical or special types, with guard and barrier being their corresponding defenses. Knowledge of whether an enemy has a higher guard or barrier stat can be quite useful, as some particularly hardy enemies can be easier to manage if you attack with the opposite damage type. Having high defenses can also mitigate extra damage from a type weakness, if it's sturdy enough. The luck stat governs critical hits and the chance of extra effects like errors and debuffs. The energy stat is one of the more unique additions to disc creatures. Instead of a traditional MP system, energy is consumed by creatures through attacks, but it has to be regained through a skill called the E-Charge. This regains most of your energy, but any attacks that land on your creature during that time are immediately critical hits. Enemies also abide by the same rule, so hitting them when they E-Charge is very effective. For bosses, taking advantage of their E-Charging is crucial in defeating them. As a player, it may sound like E-Charging is something to avoid doing yourself, and while that's partially true, it's not always the huge risk it seems. Each creature E-Charges individually, so an enemy might attack another member of your team instead. E-Charging can also be avoided by using consumable items to regain energy instead of E-Charging. However, as you progress through the game, the amount of energy you use will often outpace what you get by using items. More easily, you can cover tank with a sturdy creature, and then have one of its allies E-Charge for a safer recovery. It is important to keep in mind, as energy costs for moves only go up through the game, and E-Charging becomes a more frequent necessity. Items can be handy, but if it's a restorative or capture item, there is a limit to their reliability. Essentially, if a creature spends its turn using an item, the next turn it will be unable to use another. I'd argue that it's a good balancing decision, as having the potential to use 3 items a turn with no penalty would be much too overpowered. Outside battle, there are items that teleport you back to the disc cafe, your house, or out of a cave. Stink bombs can outright remove all encounters from the screen, which is a godsend for revisiting certain dungeons. There's also a purchasable disc cafe set that can function like a tent or cabin found in many RPGs. Alongside items, you can also assign equipment to your creatures, much like a held item. Some of their effects include immunity to various status effects, extra experience points for leveling, a boost to accuracy or another stat, boost to moves of a specific type, and others. In my experience, they varied in usefulness, with the Iron Sandals, Pop Box, and Peppy Parka seeing the most use. Defeating enemies rewards experience points, as you can expect. Upon leveling up, your creatures regain all their HP and can learn new moves. Some RPGs will raise your maximum HP without refilling the HP bar, but Disc Creatures mercifully does refill it. Considering how long these initial dungeon runs can be, having this sustainability in your creature's health was helpful. Moves in Disc Creatures are essentially an unlocked pool of options that grows as you hit certain requirements. These requirements can be a creature's level, possession of a specific disc that is consumed, or other factors. Early on, an NPC gives you a move changer that allows for this selection of moves from the pool anywhere, not just at the PC. As previously mentioned, your creatures can only use 4 moves at a time, but being able to change them at a whim outside of combat provides a handy level of adaptability if you need it. For example, many creatures have access to simple non-damaging status effect moves at a low level. If you're looking to capture a creature, but your creatures are under the item cooldown turn, you can use a status effect move to use up a turn without defeating your target prematurely. Coming back to the story, the trip up through Pecan Forest serves as the game's first sort of dungeon. You have a gauntlet of enemies that can be fought, which can eat away at your resources, though the overworld encounters in this area are sluggish and quite easy to avoid if you want. I don't recommend avoiding these encounters yet, as they have a host of new creatures to find and expand your pool of elemental types. They're also very easy to capture, so you often don't need to invest capturing items into them to secure a disc. In Disc Creatures, traversing dungeons does carry some level of skill. You see, there are no random encounters in the game. All wild enemies use this generic dark monster sprite to represent an encounter. They move around by themselves, and by avoiding them you can avoid fights if you wish. For the first few areas, enemies in the overworld move sluggishly and at random, making them quite easy to avoid. These first initial areas also have more space, which helps as well. By the end of the game though, these enemies will move much faster and more erratic. The encounters in Juglin Maze, Under the Clock, and Mount Azel will outright chase the player down. These locations also have tighter, maze-like pathways that can make enemy encounters difficult to avoid. At certain points, there are little scripted ambushes or small gimmicks with enemy encounters too. Obviously, this is all assuming you even want to avoid encounters, as these fights are opportunities for EXP and new creatures to capture. How you collect creatures, as I said before, is defeating them in combat with a passive chance to copy their data to a disc. Again, you aren't really capturing a specific creature, you're just stealing their credit card info and browsing history in order to make a living copy of them. The item High-Speed Memory is used to make this passive chance higher. In combat, you have a creature use High-Speed Memory on the target. This consumes the item and fills a meter. The meter has up to 5 charges, meaning a maximum amount of 5 high-speed memories can be used on one target. Each creature also has a base capture chance. Each charge doubles the passive chance of burning a disc after the enemy is defeated. At 5 charges or a times 10 capture rate, the chance to make a disc is so high as to be nearly guaranteed. There were only 2 creatures that I didn't capture on my first attempt with maxed odds, being Zombie Tom and Squalio. Later on in the postgame after an NPC quest, you have the opportunity to unlock and start buying an item called hyper memory, which is essentially 5 charges of high-speed memory in one item. It fully maxes out your odds with one use. There's a problem with it though. Pico is the name for money in Disc Creatures. High-speed memory costs 2 Pico. Hyper memory costs 30. One hyper memory costs the same amount as 15 high-speed memory, yet only has the effect of 5 high-speed memories. If you care about being cost-effective, there's no real reason to use hyper memory over high-speed. In a single battle, if all creatures use their turns optimally to use high-speed memory, it takes 3 turns to max out your odds. That's incredibly fast already. You can make the argument that at the postgame, frugality with money isn't likely to be a problem. Maybe it's just me, but I imagine many players who prefer to optimize won't be using hyper memory. It already costs 999 Pico to unlock, so that definitely doesn't help. Perhaps it could be changed to be a single permanent item like the Tomedar that you can use indefinitely. That alone could justify the cost to unlock it. Another option is simply making it cost 10 Pico or less at each instead. That would make it more cost effective to use instead of high-speed memory entirely. Fortunately, during the beginning of the game where we are right now, most creatures can be reliably copied without needing to worry about high speed or hyper memory. Halfway through the path is a rest area with several useful buildings and my personal favorite track from the OST. There isn't a better time to bring this up, so I'd like to discuss the music and sound design. Sound is quite important to games, for tone, atmosphere, immersion, aesthetic, and other factors. I would hope this is obvious, but a game like Disc Creatures relies on abstraction and imagination for its style. Sounds aren't going to sound like they would in real life. Everything sound-wise in Disc Creatures is electronic, from music to sound effects. But this is often paired with old pixel art games anyway as a limitation of the time. Again, this seems obvious, but I do think it would be weird to play a game like this and have completely realistic sound samples recorded from life, with a booming, high-budget orchestral score. The music in Disc Creatures is of a chiptune style, but whatever tracker SATTO used has a slightly different sound than what I've heard from other chiptune artists. This also could be due to the post-processing effects and whatever else during the mixing process. Each track has this electronic buzz to it that I initially found grating, but after being exposed to it, I think it gives the music a nice texture. Beats and drums also have this low, static texture to them. Overall, I think the soundtrack is fantastic personally, and it's an OST that I still listen to regularly. As a big music lover, having a goddamn great soundtrack is a big plus for me. Mostly, the music is there to set a tone for the area you're in. This is most apparent in Lyceum Town, Mond Ruins, and Mount Azel. I'll play some samples for you here. For battles, obviously you have tracks with more energy to complement the intensity of battle. The final boss theme for Scourgeon and Fangon is a remix of the regular battle theme with some added hype, and man, I love it. I know this section on the music is mostly me just gushing about it, but I really just love the soundtrack so much. It's very subjective though, so obviously take from this what you will. You'll know if you like it or not based on your own tastes. The sound design itself, particularly in sound effects, has a particular style to it as well. For starters, initially you might find disc creatures to be kind of loud. Sound effects, from battle sounds to opening doors, all seem to have a high volume. Obviously, of course, just turn it down to fix it, but I imagine for new players this could be off-putting. It's not a big issue though, just a nitpick. Otherwise, most of the audio in this game is downright satisfying. There's a running joke among Pokemon fans about how old Pokemon cries are just distorted, garbled sounds, but if you're a fan of that, Disc Creatures has a lot of it. Creatures themselves don't have cries in battle, just a specific few in story cutscenes. But moves and attacks all have various sounds that fit their in-universe sources. If you use an icy attack, you get a crystalline sound. If you do a fire attack, you get the low, rumbling, burning sounds. Sound effects all have a level of electronic distortion consistent with the game's retro style, resembling the sounds of an old handheld console. Though bigger, heavier sounds or attacks do have a level of punch to them I definitely find satisfying. When my prominence hits that crit blaze slash, ooh boy. Moving through the world and hearing sound effects of doors, screens, water, and other environmental sounds is nice. The sound effects used in the world definitely give a feel of the material or texture of the object. For example, the Disc Cafe door sounds very glassy and rounded, same for the town signs and computers. That scary tree in Juggling Woods that chases you down wouldn't be the same without its rhythmic, booming footsteps. There isn't much else to say about it. Essentially, I think it's competently designed and satisfying in my monkey brain dopamine receptors. Particularly with the music, I understand that enjoyment comes down to subjective taste, but overall I think the music and sound are well made and suit the game's art style. Moving on, the rest area contains a few interesting people and places. The first of which is a man who offers a special flute that functions like a fishing rod, using musical consumables to entice water creatures to the surface. There's also a man lying down in a patch of grass who expresses his comfort in the current moment. He talks about how this moment of carefree bliss is fleeting. He'll soon be busy with work and home responsibilities, but that he's generally happy, even if he does desire that his time here in the grass would last a little longer. This guy has always stuck out to me in my memory, and I think it's for a particular reason. The writing in this game seems to have this very mature quality. For many games in the monster taming genre, the target audience is usually children, and the writing usually reflects that. What I mean is that they avoid violence aside from the cartoonish and fantastical. Characters and villains are often simple to understand. Certain uglier subjects like death, blood, pain, drugs, alcohol, sex, and vices in general are usually absent, or at the very least, heavily toned down. In Pokemon, people and Pokemon are almost never shown dying, and death is merely alluded to in locations like Mount Pyre, the Tower in Lavender Town, or other Pokemon graveyards. In battle, Pokemon don't die, they faint. Since Gen 4, gambling casinos were removed to appease video game rating boards. Generally, the world of Pokemon is idyllic, with danger never being too serious. Digimon seems to be similar, but a bit different. Some Digimon outright use recognizable firearms or real weapons, and their designs often have been edgier and at times more sexual in nature.
I want a diamond ring, I want some bracelets and everything. Daddy, you better get the best one.
In older Digimon games, particularly World 1 for example, Digimon do die, but are reborn almost immediately without any apparent loss of identity or ego. In Fossil Fighters Champions, the Barebones Brigade are an evil team of punks and villains. Yet they seem to be quite wacky and silly, particularly the faceless grunts you defeat many of. While this group does cause mischief, it ultimately only serves to interrupt the workings of the player rather than cause real harm. It's written like a cartoon. I could go on, but hopefully you get my point. Obviously there are exceptions like little adult jokes slipped in here and there that go over kids' heads, and sometimes games for kids will surprise us with unexpected moments of maturity. Monster Rancher famously has had incredibly sad funeral scenes for monsters who can outright die. Not every game in the subgenre is made for kids as well, as Shin Megami Tensei should serve as an obvious example. That series is full of death, blood, sex appeal, boobs, butt, genitalia, and abstract high concepts combined from several real-world religions and philosophies. Essentially, if the game is obviously targeted at kids, there will be a lack of certain overt subjects, in most ways, in those games. Disc Creatures is in kind of a weird place in this regard, because many of its inspirations are targeted for kids, it wears this nostalgic inspiration proudly, and yet there are events or passages of dialogue that contain a mature tone. The people who grew up with old pixel monster tamers of the Game Boy and Game Boy Color era are well into adulthood by now, including SATTO himself. So it's likely the more mature aspects of this game would be more appreciated by the kinds of adults who share this nostalgia. This simple NPC lying in the grass was written by SATTO, who as an adult understands life's responsibilities, and I imagine some of this is channeled into his writing for the game. So despite playing as a child character and being inspired by games targeted for children, Disc Creatures is a game likely to be enjoyed mostly by adults, or at least a range that includes adults. Though before I end this tangent, I'd like to clear up some misconceptions. Firstly, no, there's nothing wrong with adults enjoying games for kids, or kids media, at least I think so. It should go without saying, but this channel is intended for the purpose of analyzing monster taming games, many of which, as stated previously, are targeted for kids. Secondly, I don't want to give the misconception that Disc Creatures is a raunchy, violent, or harsh game. It's not. We will reach points in the story where characters do outright die, suffer painfully or unpleasant things, but the game's visual style and writing color the tone of those scenes in a very non-exploitative way. I'll point them out when we get there, but these moments are exceptions rather than the norm. Finally, there's nothing wrong with games being gory or containing uglier subjects in a gratuitous way. What matters is how it fits into the game's overall tone and style. But yes, so far all of this is over a minor, unnamed NPC lying in the grass, talking about working and shopping with his wife. Let's continue. Before you can progress, you'll have to deal with some goons causing trouble for an old man, as well as blocking the path north. The thug who you fight is a discer himself, so obviously not everyone keeps their title as a disc ranger unsoiled as you do. After sending the goon squad packing, the old man, a previous discer himself, thanks you and laments on the state of the world, saying that progress and conflict may indeed go hand in hand. A surprisingly nuanced opinion, again an example of the maturity written into this game. You continue on through Pecan Forest and reach the abandoned house where those goons are being robbed and having their minds wiped by the boss within. Puzz, the resident of this abandoned house, explains his dog-eat-dog worldview, and he purposely started the rumors about this house in order to lure in curious people, robbing them and sending them away unharmed. Puzz views humanity as lesser than himself, a resource to be exploited. You defeat Puzz and the day is saved. His meek henchman, a little Albergy, is in disbelief that you defeated Puzz and expresses a desire to become strong, likely after being pushed around by Puzz for God knows how long. Your Syndro from home shows up, comments on the situation, before you both return home. You'll find this is a recurring little bit. You defeat the episode's boss, and then Syndro shows up to take you home. With that, episode 1 is complete. Before the second episode begins, as will become the norm, you wake up in bed, go downstairs, your mom is watching TV, and you leave. A special NPC shows up by the name of Mr. Discer, who operates a sort of in-game gacha machine. You give him 20 pico, and he gives you a random disc. He has a pool of possible discs to win, with varying rarities from common to super rare, much like gacha games in real life. Personally, I always enjoyed playing his gacha, as you have the potential to obtain rare creatures early. Getting a super rare can be a real game changer for your playthrough. On my first, I got an Elepicure early, and that guy was a core member of my team for the whole game. According to the Disc Creatures wiki, the machine has a built-in system to prevent save scumming, using random numbers which are pushed 3 visits into the future before they're used. So essentially, you would have to visit Mr. Discer more than 3 times plus saving your game in order to change the outcome. Aside from that, there's also a mercy system that will roll on higher loot tables after enough rolls with less valuable discs. After getting your prize, Mr. Discer will disappear. I don't have any hard data on what triggers his appearance, but through online discussion and my own observation, it seems like he reappears after a certain amount of time, maybe between 20 to 60 minutes, plus healing one's team at the Disc Cafe. The bulletin board has another job for you. Someone's big brother had a curse placed upon him after exploring another nearby forest known as Juglin Woods. The curse robbed him of his ability to speak, and the little brother needs a discer to lift it. You travel to Juglin Village, which sits directly next to the woods of the same name. It's mostly a country town full of farmers, but also contains a handyman business, a laboratory, and a bookstore. Turns out that Aubergy from before is working as an assistant at that lab, and offers to let you in and introduce you to his employer, the preoccupied and studious Dr. Grape. Dr. Grape introduces you to the concept of disc fusion, which allows for special creatures to be made from combining 2 together. A significant number of creatures are also obtained through this fusion system. You don't fuse just any old creature, there is a large list of recipes that use specific creatures to make a new one. There are exactly 40 recipes, with some only obtainable in the postgame. You simply go to the disc or pro shop in Lyceum Town with discs of the 2 required creatures. The legendaries Heteras, Pyroclastus, Poseidon, and Fangon are obtained in this way, and some recipes require some pretty rare creatures. Generally, creatures obtained from fusions are stronger than ones you can capture in the wild, so spending the time to generate them is definitely worth it. If you're interested in collecting every single creature, you will have to engage with fusion. Making treks back into previously visited dungeons for discs can be a trip, so I recommend bringing a few stink bombs. I also recommend keeping 1 copy of every disc you find on hand, just in case a recipe needs it. After the lab, up ahead is a goofy man with a unique hat who puts you into a forced tutorial teaching you the type matchups. To be honest, I found his placement here in the second chapter to be quite frustrating, as you cannot progress until humoring him, and by this time you should have a basic grasp on type matchups. You essentially select the type for him to use exclusively, then win 3 matches against him to prove your understanding. You only have to do this once before you can progress. However, doing all of them may be worth doing early on because he does reward you with an exclusive fusion recipe. His interactions with the player character are kind of funny, I guess. I found them a little funny. There's a specific anime trope that TV Tropes lists as the face fault, where a character falls over in reaction to something stupid or absurd. The game is full of moments like this. Nearby is the bookstore, where you meet a shy girl named Rieta and the creature Paraly. The 2 of them are working on the Creaturepedia, a book that lists where to find every known creature. Currently it's incomplete, and you agree to help them fill it out. As the game progresses, they'll sell you more pages as you go, and it's very useful most of the time in tracking down where to find a creature. Hidden away on a shelf in another room, easily missable, is a book with information on Fangon, even showing a little cutscene with a mysterious silhouette of the creature. I really like this bit because I missed it on my first playthrough, and it rewards exploration on the player's end, even in mundane locations like a house. Sort of like how in Final Fantasy VI there's elixirs in the clocks if you check. Just a nice little secret. Unfortunately, a large tree stands unnaturally in the way between you and the entrance to Juglin Woods. A local creature-ran construction team can remove it, but the foreman wants the player to capture them a copy of a Drakling creature in exchange. Like the cleaners in Lyceum Town, having a business staffed by creatures is a nice bit of world building that helps to cement the idea that humans and creature society is merging together. That and the foreman needing a Drakling disc is a small but appreciated way of integrating game mechanics into the world of the game. Many times such gameplay aspects, particularly in RPGs, powers, spells, and other mechanics are clearly separated from the narrative side of the game. A common example is a character death when reviving spells are often used in combat. Usually the battle screen is merely an abstraction of events happening in the overworld, as it's sometimes called, and that's fine. It's just an extra layer of creative thinking when mechanics within the battle screen are written into the world building, even if mundane. Once the tree is removed by the foreman, you are free to enter Juglin Woods. Getting my bias out of the way now, this next section is without a doubt my favorite in the whole game. Soon after you enter, the theme for this area kicks in. Given the bleep bloop nature of chiptune style music, it's a cacophony of melodies, and I really think it sets a sinister tone for the whole area. You're greeted with a signpost talking about how scarecrows eat your flesh if you come after dark. Ghost creatures taunt you, and the overworld encounters start moving more erratically than their sluggishness in the pecan forest. Very early on in the area, the game starts having these little horror set pieces, like picking up an item that causes a scarecrow to appear behind you just out of view, or a long path with an increasing number of scarecrows that sometimes do a little jump scare. The best of these involve enemy discers and NPCs that are meant to cause you to question if what you're seeing is even real. A discer you fight was in fact just a scarecrow. A male discer becomes female after defeating him. A child becomes an old man. Notably as well, they all seem to use at least one spirit-type creature in battle. There's even a nonsensical disc cafe out in the middle of the woods. Inside there are no customers, only the 2 staff. Sitting on the couch as a spook laugh at you. The item shop offers only juice and booze, each of which are a capturable creature attack between a drink-themed duo. The main attendant lady has a scary demon face if you turn away, and worst of all, the NPC standing outside grows freakishly tall with a weird stretched out neck. Later on in the woods, there's also a chase sequence with a large spooky dead tree that I have no shame admitting was able to jump scare me even on a second playthrough. Whether or not you inherently value such things is up to you, but personally I found it interesting and entertaining for this type of game. It's impressive to me that in a pixel art chiptune, Game Boy Color looking monster taming game, there could be anything resembling an effective horror sequence. The area is colorful, not dark or dim. The music is, well, chiptune, not the ambient drone of a horror soundtrack, and while still silly at times, these set pieces can still be unnerving. Forgive me for going on about this, it's just a difficult sweet spot in tone to hit considering how consistent the art side of things are throughout the game. SATTO absolutely nailed it in this section. Eventually you reach the boss area, getting trapped by an army of scarecrows. The boss itself is called Scarefolk, and it's been taking in creatures abandoned by their discers. It resents humans and seeks revenge on any who enter its forest. Now, if you remember, the little brother who posted the bulletin board request specifically mentions his older brother losing his voice from a curse. A creature generated from a disc cannot speak as previously established. So essentially, the Scarefolk is exacting its revenge upon humans by inflicting them with the same disability that these human abandoned creatures have. It's an interesting moral conundrum. Is the Scarefolk really that bad, or unjustified in its anger? But as your Syndro companion says when he comes to pick you up, that's still no excuse for what it did. Cursing poor innocent children like that is wrong no matter how you slice it. I'll say it again, but the writing in this game does have moments of maturity that one wouldn't expect from a game of this genre. After this, you once again go home, another adventure completed. You begin episode 3 with news that a Discer Pro Shop has opened, allowing you to use fusion recipes, as well as the reincarburation mechanic if desired. Reincarburation is a system of giving your creatures stat points in exchange for levels. You level a creature up, then consume those levels to gain stat points. You can use these stat points on chosen stats in order to make a simplified RPG build of sorts. Of course, afterwards you level your creature back up. The main story of this game can be completed without reincarburation, and given how much level grinding is required for results, I assume it is meant for the post-game Disc Coliseum. Outside, the bulletin board mission you receive next asks for a Discer to stop a group of unknown hooligans who are poaching a specific species of creature to potential extinction. The poaching problem is happening in the seaside town of Port, which requires the player to travel through the currently closed Mon Tunnel. The tunnel itself is blocked by a persistent pile of poisonous gunk that some unknown creature is leaving behind during the night. The cleaning crew suggests possibly talking to an eccentric creature expert in the Pecan Forest safe area who might be able to help. After heading up and meeting this man, his name is Toma, you discover he is in fact quite eccentric. He is an obsessive fan of the creature Tomati and any tomato-themed creatures. He'll only talk to you if you have a Tomati in your party, and after you fulfill his request, he gives you a device called the Tomadar. This device can detect tomato-themed creatures in specific areas. If you head back to the tunnel in Lyceum Town, using the Tomadar reveals the culprit. A nearby Tomati turns out to be a poisonous zombie Tom in disguise, who you then fight as a mini-boss. In both of my playthroughs, he was a tough little bastard, even with his quadruple weakness to fire. Other than bringing type advantages, a few poison-curing items will be quite helpful. Once he's defeated, you'll be able to progress onwards. Mon Tunnel itself is an interesting place. As a dungeon, a noticeable step up in length and how much it demands of you or your resources. In the overarching story, it's not a terribly relevant location quite yet, so for now it's simply a place to get through. I do like how the Molvellos, these little shovel hand mole guys, have some sort of cockneyed accent. I can't tell if it's supposed to be British, Australian, or some other accent, but I found it to be a funny bit of characterization. The cave itself is full of earth, rock, and metal creatures, but for now there isn't that much else to say about it. The only activity is paying the workers to find items for you, which can lead to some equipment and a fusion recipe if you're diligent. Once you reach Path and then Port, you'll immediately encounter the previously mentioned gang of poachers who are preparing to go on another hunt. The specific creature they're hunting for is called a babool. Babools are a cute-looking floating eyeball creature, and the gang harvests their tears to sell for apparently quite a sum of cash. As you try to stop them, the gang leader has you fight one of his cronies named Donil. You step aside to have a Discer battle, the battle animation starts up, and bam, the guy just decks you right in the face, knocking you clean out. This scene is such a clever bit of subversion, and again, it's clear that SATTO understands the material that Disc Creatures is inspired by. Typically in the monster tamer genre of games, even against criminal characters, fights are almost always settled by a creature battle. In terms of game mechanics, it's an obvious choice. If your game is about making fantasy creatures battle, as a game writer, you would write conflicts or disputes in order to facilitate those battles. In Pokemon, you and your opponent each send out Pokemon to battle. This almost always happens even if your opponent is a member of the typical evil team, like Rocket, Aqua, Magma, Plasma, or whoever. Even though Pokemon Rangers gameplay isn't the same, the Go-Rock squad used these portable computers to control Pokemon in order to combat the player. Fossil Fighters champions have the Bare Bones Brigade use skeletal dinosaurs. Basically, again, my point is that conflict is solved through the in-game battle system, even if realistically, Cue-Ball Paxton should easily be able to beat up an 11-year-old trainer. It's reasonable to imagine that most players at some point have asked themselves questions in this exact train of thought. So going back to Disc Creatures, I love this moment because up until the last second, you are fully expecting another typical trainer versus trainer battle, like every other game that contextualizes its conflicts into the battle system. Then for one scene, the henchman Donil shows us the logical endpoint of that previously mentioned train of thought and sucker punches us. So yes, theoretically an enemy trainer could just attack us instead. Thus our conflict is ended, but not by a creature battle. It also speaks to the character of the thugs since their lack of morals and honor brings them so low as to knock a child unconscious. Though as you'll see later on, it isn't the worst of what they'll do. After waking up, you'll soon be free to explore Pista Port, as well as continue following the thugs into Pista Grotto, once you're ready. The port town does have a certain item you can buy from an NPC, and there's no better time than to talk about the quality of life features this game has. Disc Creatures does have several features that help remove what many would call tedium from certain aspects of the game. Since this game is pretty unknown in the greater gaming world, most players are probably going to be Monster Tamer fans, or at least Pokemon fans. Hell, I'm one of them. It's inevitable that there's going to be certain expectations about Disc Creatures because of this, and again it would be foolish to deny the influences that Disc Creatures clearly has. The definition of quality of life itself implies a comparison between two games anyway. Before I continue, there's an important aspect of raising creatures I should mention. The level cap is 50, and any freshly generated creatures are going to be level 1. Including legendary creatures, that means any new creature you want to use will always need to be leveled up through grinding or other means. There's certainly pros and cons to this, as players who hate grinding will find having to raise new creatures all the way from level 1 to be frustrating, even with the quality of life elements. Those of us who may be more sentimental may find the time spent raising a creature to be a bonding experience. To assist the player from having to grind, there are two specific things that SATTO added. One is the Peppy Parka, which is a simple equipable item that increases EXP gained. This is that item I mentioned before, which you can buy from a sleeping NPC in Pista Port. Very simple, akin to a lucky egg from Pokemon, but they don't come cheap, certainly not on your first visit to this town. Throw that on a low-level creature, have a cover tank, and a creature for dealing damage, and bada bing, you can raise a creature pretty quickly on Mount Azel, or the highest dungeon available. The most notable addition, and one that most Steam reviews have made note to mention, is the Grove Stove. It's that building in the Pecan Forest safe area where you can pay money to have a creature eat a meal with you, which will level them up to specific level increments. Like the kids' meal levels your creature to 5, the super sweet curry to level 12 from level 5, etc. More meals are unlocked as you play, and for the early and mid game, these increments mean that you can swap creatures out as you please, and they'll be at least a viable level for the upcoming obstacles. This is of course provided you have the money. There is one major flaw of the Grove Stove though. The level cap is 15. There are no meals to instantly level your creature any higher than that. By the time you get to the Pecan Scrapyard and Mount Azel, enemy creatures will be in the level 30 and 40-ish range. This doesn't match. It's obvious that there's an effort to reduce grind on the player, but level 15 being the limit to this quality of life aspect just hurts. And make no mistake, not all creatures are created equal. You are absolutely encouraged to swap out your starters for new creatures. There's even a Discer battle on Mount Azel, where the enemy uses 3 of the starting creatures only to get stomped. It's a not so subtle hint that sticking with the early game creatures can be a disadvantage. Creatures found later in the game usually have access to some stronger moves and noticeably better stats. So it's going to be unavoidable in your playthrough that you'll have to grind to level your creatures. Even in the postgame, the level cap on the Grove Stove stays at 15. Having the restaurant there at all is great, but not following through to at least level 30 is just inconsistent. Out of all the negative criticism of the game I've seen during my research, the level cap on the Grove Stove is by far the most consistently mentioned. To alleviate this, during my playthroughs, I would get into these little cycles between episodes. After beating an episode to prepare for the next dungeon, I would often need to raise a new creature. Typically this would be one of decent power or fitting a particular role, and particularly having a type advantage over the major creature types found in the next dungeon. I would sell any discs I could spare, take the new creature to the Grove Stove, buy the new Creaturepedia pages for the dungeon I just beat, then go in and capture all the creatures to fill out the pages. I would engage in every battle, cover tanking to protect the new creature. This means I could gain some discs for money while also leveling the new creature, on top of filling out the Creaturepedia for that area. 2 birds with 1 stone. In my experience, the new creature was often leveled up enough to be usable for the next dungeon, but still often under-leveled to a small degree. Getting the Peppy Parka is a great boon for this step, but 500 Pico is a lot of money pre-Mount Azel. I would bring up the move changer again, but it's already been explained. I would still count it as a quality of life feature though. Anyway, there's a couple living in a house in Pista Port that give more context to the situation involving the poaching of babool creatures. The babool tears are some sort of miracle cosmetic substance supposedly able to grow back hair and make someone look more beautiful. I assume that it's rubbed into the skin or scalp like some sort of cream. However, to obtain the tears, babool have to be killed, quite brutally. In Pista Grotto, the leader Suts explains that prolonging the suffering of the Babool will squeeze more tears out of them, thus earning the crew more money. It's a grim situation, one that can easily be argued as a parallel to animals hunted in real-world traditional Chinese medicine, or TCM for short. Many animals such as black bears, tigers, musk deer, and other animals are poached or harmed for certain tissues, body parts, or fluids. Many of these animal parts are made into medicines, perfumes, or cosmetic items. Later on, after the events of this chapter have ended, Babool tears are revealed to be completely ineffectual, a placebo. Ultimately, unless the developer SATTO directly confirms this practice as a direct allegory for Babool tears, I can't 100% say for certain. I'm also not here to argue a narrative for or against TCM. My point is that the ethical problems many people have with the harvesting of animal parts for traditional medicines and cosmetics for TCM likely helped to inspire this particular chapter of Disc Creatures. The gang of poachers head further back into the grotto, and you follow. It's a long dungeon, but along the way you'll have a rematch with Donil before reaching the final chamber of the cave, where the rest of the gang are hunting. Dutz tried to talk with you, justifying his poaching as simply doing a dirty job the public won't have to see in order to get the products they want. He argues that simply stopping him for our cause won't stop the problem as a whole. Nonetheless, the two of you fight, with Suts employing a noticed level of strategy with his team. He even uses cover tanking. Once defeated, he takes it in stride, respecting your victory and stating his intention to clear out. He reveals what I stated before about the Babool tears doing nothing, stating that people just want something to believe in, even if it's just a lie. A loud noise from the chamber beyond startles the two of you, and you head inside. Inside is another waterfall with a small lake, but also a strange feminine statue. Just as the poachers are about to leave, numerous Babool appear and converge into a large creature known as an aquatoid, which you can probably guess is the boss of this area. When you arrive, you find Suts and his gang injured and prone, lying about on the cave floor. They beg for help, but Suts is tossed aside and repeatedly crushed by the creature. His body is smashed into almost a pulp before the aquatoid picks up his corpse and tosses it into the water. Suts is never seen again. This is again one of those moments where death and brutality is depicted tastefully without exploitation. No gore, no blood, just an abstract blob of pixels. You fight the creature yourself, and upon its defeat, the aquatoid breaks off into fleeing Babool. The rest of the gang ran off during the fight, surviving their injuries it seems, and your Syndro arrives to retrieve you. Episode 4 begins with a boss monster arriving in town, seeking a fight against the strongest person he can find. He's causing trouble and a disturbance, so you put a stop to him. It's silly, but his injured pride is how you unlock fast travel. Blobzilla will throw you, quite literally, to any of the towns where you have been previously. Fortunately, he throws a cushion for you to land on. The bulletin board in town has another job for a Discer. A pair of Clud creatures are causing trouble with their ability to transform and imitate other living beings, including people. They hang out in the Mon Tunnel, and you'll quickly run into them. Both Little and Big Clud are a couple of arrogant goofballs who love to boast about themselves. You confront the two of them and defeat them, where they immediately grovel for mercy and run away. The episode complete music plays, and your Syndro companion comes to take you home, and it should be obvious that this is ending too fast. Of course, when you wake up the next day, something is wrong. Your mother is gone, as well as all of the townspeople who usually hang out around outside. Turns out that the Clud brothers have impersonated you and caused trouble with your appearance. So now all the townspeople avoid you to an extreme degree, even your own mom. It also extends to shopkeepers, but this is easily bypassed since Aubergy and Dr. Grape arrive and offer to help you. It's not as if you don't have access to shops, as the POV temporarily switches to either Aubergy or Dr. Grape. It's just a novelty, but serves to emotionally connect the player character with these two characters. Essentially, your next objective is to track the Clud brothers down within the Mon Tunnel, which you do. However, they escape into a newly opened section of caves and ruins. It's a massive area, and along the way, you'll see archaeologists and treasure hunters, as well as the remains of some ancient civilization. There's a massive cave painting with depictions of two creatures. The one on the right I believe to be one of the legendaries obtainable in the postgame, whereas the left one seems to resemble a cryptod from Pista Grotto, but they're both abstracted enough that I can't be certain. That is just a hypothesis. There's also various NPCs sharing their thoughts on this recent discovery, including one name-dropping Fanggun again. To be quite honest, most of the Mon ruins and the lava field later on are so dungeon crawl focused, the only real story beats are that the Clud brothers occasionally lay traps for you. I don't see this as a bad thing, however. Personally, I value time in RPGs where the player is simply allowed to progress by themselves. For what it's worth, I appreciate the bit of history here, since it implies that human beings knew of creatures a long time ago, and their relatively recent discovery is actually a rediscovery. Eventually, after the player forges a path through magma, stone, smoke, and many fire creatures, you track the Clud brothers down to the end of the cave in front of a cataract of magma. They're not joking around anymore, and the two merge into a single large boss creature, Claymore. Before the fight, they boast that once they're done with you, they'll replace you permanently. In my experience, it's a tough fight. Claymore is pretty bulky in terms of defenses, and your damage only serves to separate the two brothers back into their original forms. Once that happens, you must defeat both brothers before they merge back together. Once defeated, you apprehend them and return home, with your Syndro companion informing you that your reputation has been repaired with the help of Aubergy and Dr. Grape. This next episode, Hidden Truths, is the longest in the whole game. It features 2 new dungeons instead of 1. The premise is, the owner of the sick porca you likely ran into in Pista Port is requesting someone find a mythical superfruit in Pecan Forest that should heal his creature. The owner seeks to ride out across the sea to Mount Azel, a location supposedly where Fangun lives, and the player has likely heard foreshadowed multiple times throughout the game so far. Before I begin, there's an elephant in the room to talk about that relates to this upcoming section. The dungeons in this game vary from locations like forests, caves, lava fields, icy mountains, and scenic nature paths. Disc Creatures is by no means a dungeon crawler, but in my opinion, these segments are rarely linear. Pecan Forest is mostly a meandering path and serves well as a tutorial dungeon. As you progress throughout the game, you'll see more side areas and secret paths. You can find fishing spots, shortcuts, items to collect, and special creature encounters, among other things. By the time you get to Mount Azel, dungeons can stretch for very long, with that particular mountain being pretty complex. The lack of any standard RPG map also adds to this. I have no shame in admitting that I got lost on my first time through Mount Azel, and God knows I don't have it memorized like many of the other dungeons. Personally, I really like this sort of thing, but I know many players out there can get frustrated from lengthy exploration. However, there is an exception to this progression of complexity in the dungeon layouts, and that is the Pecan Scrapyard area. Episode 5, as I mentioned before, has 2 dungeons in it rather than the standard single dungeon. The pathways are also so tight that exploration is out of the question. The only real non-combat activity, if you're even trying to, is avoiding the enemies within a tight space. To be fair, there is a secret path to a fortune teller who gives access to a couple of rare creatures. Compared to the previous dungeons, and Mount Azel afterward, it is a noticeable inconsistency in how much you can explore. What is pretty consistent, however, is how the dungeons and disc creatures prepare you for the next one. Mount Azel is full of ice creatures, who are weak to the metal creatures you can find in the Pecan Scrapyard. Those metal creatures are weak to the several ground creatures you'll find in the Mon Tunnel, plus the fire types help out on Mount Azel. Creatures in Mon Tunnel are often weak to water types, which you'll find plenty of in Pista Grotto. Those same water types are also weak to many of the grass types found in both Pecan Forest and Juglin Woods. Obviously, this isn't true for every single creature in the encounter table, but overall the game is good at providing you with the tools necessary to overcome its obstacles. Most dungeons also have fishing spots, even in lava, where the player can fish using their whirl whistle. I appreciate the flavor of using a musical instrument to fish instead of a rod, but I do wish it didn't use consumable charges. They're cheap to buy in bulk, so it's just a personal nitpick, but I did have occasions where I was fishing for rare creatures and ran out. Anyway, back to the Pecan Scrapyard. After accepting the quest on the bulletin board, a UFO shows up. Yes, that's right. You'll see it multiple times during the trek into the new area of Pecan Forest. Once in the Pecan Forest safe zone, you'll see a Denti trying to clear away piles of scrap metal, claiming that they're harmful to the superfruit and, by extension I assume, the rest of the forest. You reunite with the Clud brothers, who are serving a sentence of community service. They clear away the scrap, allowing you to enter the Pecan Scrapyard area. The UFO is dropping piles of scrap metal everywhere, and the entire path through the forest is full of metal and electric creatures. Once you make your way through the tight confines of the forest, you'll reach an open area with giant metal screws. The UFO shows up to dump more scrap, and the Clud brothers arrive to knock the UFO from the sky. A grayish creature emerges from the downed spacecraft and eventually explains its intentions. The creature, called a Rog, came to Earth and was surprised how low technology we were, and decided to gift humanity some of the most precious metal material its people had. Rock becomes angry when the Clud brothers explain how it's only causing problems. Rog thinks humanity ungrateful, and decides to eliminate both the player and the Cluds, though the situation is played off as comedic. Thus begins the boss fight. I personally found it to be a decent challenge. Rog has 2 hardy metal walls with him, who will cover tank to protect him while he attacks. My strategy on my second playthrough involved using my trusty slab lock with his earth attacks, as well as using a Smogul, whose poison arrows deal extra damage. With Rog defeated and angrily leaving in its UFO, the superfruit lies directly beyond in a tree. Upon taking it to the Porca in Pistaport, the narwhal-like creature will regain its health and energy, allowing you to ride upon its back to Mount Azel. At the Porca's dock, you'll meet a posh researcher named Carl who is dying to get out to Mount Azel, as he seems to have it on good word that Fangin lives there. The man seems obsessed with finding the legendary creature, and being impressed with you, he requests you as a sort of bodyguard. Mount Azel is a very dangerous place full of tough creatures. People were described as going missing there in search of Fangin, and the place seeming to have an abundance of ghostly Garuge creatures can give the mountain a slightly foreboding feeling. It's also full of very lucrative creatures. Speaking of making money, there's a particular money issue I ran into during my playtime. To explain that, I'd like to go on a bit of a tangent about money and resources in this game. Strictly talking about RPGs in general, players will almost always have some sort of resource management. Part of the skill being tested in RPGs is the decision making when it comes to using a player's resources, though how much the player is rewarded or punished based on their decisions can vary greatly. And what do I mean by resources? For sake of argument, let's say resources can be something used or consumed in order to create new things or change something in a game. An easy example would be money, but this also applies to MP or magic points, spell slots, expendable currencies, items, equipment, spells and abilities, skill points or perk points, or many other potential things. Some examples of ways that RPGs require decision making on how to spend your resources could be things like buying items to prepare for a dungeon, using MP to cast a spell, consuming a limited item to unlock a pathway, spending a skill point in a perk tree, or many other situations. Oftentimes, smaller obstacles or battles can wear down a player's available resources, whether it be healing, ammunition, or other things. If there's a boss fight or some final obstacle at the end of a dungeon, how efficiently the player wants to use their resources can often give them an advantage over the boss, or prevent being in a disadvantageous state. What comes to mind is the common RPG habit of saving elixirs and high-value healing items until the endgame, but then never using them anyway. It's something meme to death that I'm absolutely guilty of as well, but more to the point, that habit is an example of decision-making from the player on how to spend resources. The balance and implementation of resources versus attrition is not a new concept, and both forums and articles alike have been talking about it for decades. It goes back even further to the days of old tabletop RPGs, and I would argue even into sports and war. My point in bringing this up is to get you in this sort of mindset of thinking about disc creatures with this sort of abstract resource management lens. What sort of resources does the player have access to in disc creatures? Mostly you have money, and by extension the items that you purchase with that money. You also have the disc cafe and healing PCs found in dungeons, which effectively save your resources through free healing. All creatures can gain access to a healing move, but in my experience, it's not that useful since it costs energy while also having a similar cooldown turn as an item use. Some creatures have access to other healing moves, though these are rare. Energy itself is a resource within battle, since after battle is over, your energy doesn't carry over. Damage itself could also be considered a resource, since ending fights quickly saves your party from unnecessary damage and therefore healing. And in certain situations, the act of leveling up can save your resources since creatures refill their health on leveling up. Generally, I think disc creatures handles these things well. Even if dungeons can be long, the player has access to free healing from leveling up and the occasional healing terminal. I generally had to use healing items in battle rather than outside them. Enemy encounters only respawn when a screen is reloaded, so backtracking via shortcuts or skillful movement is always an option. A simple strategy of using the cover move to tank damage can protect two of your creatures from most damage, as long as area of effect damage isn't used. God knows I owe my loyalty to Slablock. That guy has taken countless hits like a champ. In my experience playing, disc creatures isn't a terribly difficult game. There are tough moments, especially boss fights, but overall I rarely felt like I was struggling. There is one exception, however, and that's with how much money the game provides. How the player is expected to gain money is through discs. When you burn copies from a creature, you have the option to sell the disc at shops for pico. Obviously, if it's a new creature, most players will probably generate it rather than sell the disc, though rare creature discs are usually worth more money. The system seems to be intended in a way that you passively gain discs through combat, loading you with unnecessary several copies, which you can then sell to shops. You can also find pico out in the world, though it's never a fortune by any means. Pico can also sometimes be a reward for defeating other discers, though sometimes they give you items instead. The system works fine in principle. The problem for me lies in how it overlaps with the Creaturepedia. As mentioned back in episode 2 story, in Jungle Village there is a girl named Marietta and her Paralyte who sell you pages for the Creaturepedia. The pages come in sets for each dungeon area, with each set becoming more and more expensive. The Creaturepedia doesn't provide flavor info on every creature in the game, only where wild ones are found. Sometimes the location is specific enough to immediately understand, and other times it is incredibly vague, like what is this exclamation point supposed to mean exactly? This is a separate problem though, and my issue with the Creaturepedia is how costly it is. During both of my playthroughs, I would buy any new Creaturepedia pages as soon as I could. Having these Creaturepedia pages means access to more creatures, as oftentimes the rarer ones are harder to find without the book providing hints. As these sets grew more expensive, I would often struggle to find the money to pay for them, among the costs for healing items, transportation, and my disc gacha addiction. Yes, that last one is worth it. Super rares can alter your playthrough significantly. Remember that burning copies of a disc is a passive chance, and never guaranteed unless you use high-speed memory. High-speed memory is an item you must pay for as well. In the early game, creature discs aren't worth a whole lot individually. Filling out the Creaturepedia immediately is a good incentive for going out into dungeons, again looking for battles, as new, rare, valuable creatures are easier to find. Even if you aren't immediately finding new creatures, battles with previously encountered common creatures will still net you some discs, which adds to your money resources. I found that this sort of cycle between conquering an episode's dungeon, buying its Creaturepedia pages, then going back to fill out the Creaturepedia would create a pretty stable income. The only problem is that it can be difficult starting out when your limited money pool has to accommodate the cost of items, equipment, and traveling. Right now the workaround is to simply grind out more money from battles. Grinding isn't something I personally dislike, but I know there are many RPG players out there who dislike grinding as a principle. I think a simple fix would either be making Pico rewarded from disc or battles a guarantee every time, or to simply lower the costs for each Creaturepedia page. Essentially either let the player have more access to money at the early game, or make them spend less in this one specific example. Now how does this all tie into Mount Azel? Well, it's because of two creatures, Frostelion and Gruge. Passively acquired discs from these two essentially ended any of my money woes. If individual discs of theirs aren't that expensive, you'll just have a lot of them by the end. Overall, it's just that initial hurdle in the early to mid game that causes a lot of trouble with balancing all these different costs. You travel up the mountain, reach a village, then through the ice cave, where the meat of this dungeon takes place. It's a massive sprawling cave and can be easy to get lost in. Much like the Mon ruins in the lava area, it's mostly a solitary, unbroken stretch of exploring, this time with ice slide puzzles. You'll find some minigame rooms, oddly enough, being run by resident creatures. Plot-wise, there isn't much to say until the top is reached, but I will say if you explore enough, you'll find a creature near an underground lake who speaks of Poseidon, who is another postgame legendary. Another furtive area can be found with 3 elemental pillars for fire, water, and grass. That'll be important later in the postgame as well. You'll also see statues of Fangun the closer you are to the top. At the mountain peak, Carl congratulates you on your achievement. He then steals your disc kit and pushes you off a cliff. In his villainous monologue, Carl reveals that he was never a researcher and only wants Fangun in order to obtain a disc of it, selling it off and becoming vastly wealthy. The creature in question appears to him before zipping away, with Carl giving chase. Somehow the player survives by catching onto Rock's UFO, which deposits him back onto the peak. Not sure why he was there, but it's an obvious Deus Ex Machina. It's quite silly, perhaps fitting for the general tone of the game, but make of it what you will. In any case, the player lives and you can go on to reclaim your disc kid. You find the lifeless Carl frozen in a large pillar of ice, before being approached by 2 creatures. Turns out these two, called Yukine and Lantok, create illusions and rumors of Fangun in order to lure inquisitive human victims up to the mountain in order to devour their souls. Many frozen human victims can be seen adorning the top of the peak behind the 2 creatures. Again, death presented tastefully and without exploitation. With the secret out, the 2 of them turn to attack you, serving as the boss fight for this section. When defeated, Yukine begins a short dying speech about how humanity is nothing without creatures, how creatures are simply tools to us, and how humans are the real danger to the natural world. After Yukine disappears, your Cindero friend arrives to take you home and comment on the situation. However, this time we get a small scene showing Dr. Grape in his lab with Aubergee. He seems depressed and far off, and when questioned, he expresses cynicism about the relationship between humanity and creatures. Somewhere in the world, humans and creatures are at war. Despite Aubergee's attempts to assure him, Dr. Grape isn't convinced, and new events on his computer feed spur him to some sort of foreboding action. This is the setup for the final chapter of the game. This final episode is significantly shorter than the rest, and the meat of it is a setup for the final boss fight. Aubergee sends you a personal note to come to Dr. Grape's lab in Jungle Village in order to show off whatever new powers it's going to gain. Obviously, this note was written before the procedure had taken place. The title card has an eerie glitching effect and a distorted static noise, so you know something bad is about to happen. Of course, you can prepare for as long as you'd like. You'll find the doctor's lab empty, but the elevator is unlocked, which you ride down to a secret underground basement. You deal with the security robot and enter the room where Aubergine and Dr. Grape await. Aubergine is floating in a glass tube filled with liquid. People jars, as TV Tropes puts it. Dr. Grape is surprised to see you, as he must not know that you were registered to his retinal scanner, and he must not know that Aubergine sent you a message requesting you to come here. Dr. Grape begins his villain monologue explaining his perspective and motivation for the actions he's about to take. To explain it somewhat reductively, Grape is disillusioned about the creation of disc kids and the use of creature copies. He says that their intended purpose was to bridge the gap between the creature and human worlds, metaphorical ones, not literal. This doesn't exactly make sense, since the method of obtaining discs we see typically involves beating up creatures and copying them by force. As far as the game shows, disc kids are primarily a device for interacting with and using the creature copies, not the creatures themselves. However, more to his point, human beings now have access to the supernatural powers of creatures, often using them in battle. We also know that from experience that creatures with enough power are quite capable of killing humans if they want. Humans with access to that power, in Grape's perspective, are using it to commit more wrongdoing than before. Therefore, Grape wants to use whatever new power Aubergine obtains to power a computer. This computer has the ability to knock out the Diskernet servers, the ones you log into to access your PC and creature lists, therefore disabling all Diskers from using their creatures forever, or at least intended to be forever. Aubergine transforms into a massive creature called Scourgeon, and the fight begins. It's more of a set piece than a real fight, and you're meant to survive long enough to where Scourgeon regains control of itself and refuses to fight. Somewhere inside, Aubergine's will is still there, not wishing to bring you harm, opting to self-destruct instead. He returns to his original form, injured but alive, and Dr. Grape seems to finally understand. Despite his crushing guilt, he vows to save Aubergine while you escape with your Syndro. While having a character's motivations be illogical or flawed isn't inherently a bad thing, I think Grape's motivations are lacking in logic for what is supposed to be an intelligent, educated character. For starters, the danger and responsibility of using creatures is something the local governing bodies are quite aware of, as Specs in the beginning makes sure to tell the player. It seems like within the world, Diskers are generally responsible people if citizens are requesting help from them via a bulletin board. The existence of an application process is proof of some sort of vetting system anyway. I find it difficult to believe that Dr. Grape, as an intelligent man with an interest in worldly affairs and access to information about it, would be unaware of these vetting systems and the implied approval of Diskers by the bulletin boards. Also, in general, he must see that humans and creatures can easily live together in harmony. In Lyceum Town and Juglin Village, there are creatures living there just as any human would. He knows this, even if he doesn't get out much. Even in Pistaport, with its previous poaching problem, there are creatures living alongside humans just fine. Anytime there's a group of ne'er-do-wells, poachers, or bad people interacting with the citizenry, we have seen these citizens reject or confront them. Hell, it happened to the player character when you were falsely accused during the Clud Brothers episode, an episode where Dr. Grape personally took part in helping you. He should know that most people in this world are law-abiding and moral. Finally, Grape seems to lay most, if not all, of the blame upon humanity. This is a common trope of fiction, the abuse of the environment by the greed or dark ambitions of humankind. However, during the events of Disc Creatures, we as a player have personally stopped the abuse and outright death of innocent human beings at the hands of malevolent creatures. The poison goo in Lyceum, Puzz's robbery of Diskers in Pecan Forest, and the killing of humans on Mount Azel by Yukine and Lantok are all events that Dr. Grape knows about. Even though Scarefolk's revenge against humankind is sympathetic, coming from a place of protecting abandoned creatures, the boss's motivations are rightly criticized by your own Syndro companion. The poisoning of Pecan Forest by Rock was an accident, but the creature outright attacks you and threatens the planet when you reject his gifts. We see Dr. Grape find out all these events via his computer. In that scene, he describes humans and creatures as being at war, but given the general state of the world, a war seems like a dramatic conclusion to make. The harmful actions committed by humans and creatures upon each other seems like the exception rather than the rule, and such events are obviously dealt with via the bulletin board by Diskers of good character. Having this all crushed into a short final episode doesn't help. If we got a few small lines of dialogue showing Grape's continued descent into cynicism over the course of the game, it could be a lot more believable. The first time you meet him in episode 2, he could mention news of a poaching problem in Pistaport, foreshadowing the events of chapter 3. In episode 4, he could bitterly lament the actions of creatures upon your innocent kid reputation, perhaps saying something under his breath about how things weren't supposed to be this way, or something to show the progression of his viewpoint. Disc Creatures doesn't have massive amounts of dialogue, so some small lines here and there could go a long way. There's still the issue of the Disc Kid, however, as based upon the mechanics of its use as we see it in-game, it is quite obvious that this tool would not bring humans and creatures together. Despite Grape's cynicism, the fact he believes the initial intent of the Disc Kid was to bridge a gap between creatures and humans is odd. As I said before, at least based on what we are shown in game, the method for copying wild creatures to a disc is through violence. Shouldn't creatures hate humans or fear them? This is just my idea, but I think there's a way to fix this and make Dr. Grape's actions more believable. In the town hall, there is a small monitor next to specs that gives a bit of history on how disc kids came to be, as well as mentioning a benefit to human society. In the screen, maybe give some more information about the engineers who created the disc kid, perhaps a name and picture of their project lead. Let's call him John. Later, when the player confronts Dr. Grape, have him explain how he found a secret disk or document when researching the invention of the disc kid. This document explains how many years ago, John and his team invented the disc kid not to bring creatures together, but truly to harness their powers as weapons. Then all of this genuine harmony between humans and creatures we are exposed to throughout the game could be in spite of the malevolent intentions of the disc kid's creator. A force for harm could instead be used as a force for protection and learning. This isn't me looking too deeply into the story. Aubergee states this theme clearly after changing back to normal. You could go back to question specs afterwards, and he could explain that the secret of John's disc kid could be a great shame kept in secret by the Discord governing body. The benefits of the disc kid could not be denied, so it was kept around despite the intentions of its creator. This addition to the story could reinforce this whole theme of accepting evil in the world and continuing to do good in spite of how hopeless it seems. It's probably not a perfect solution, but I'm just trying to fix what seems like an otherwise rushed climax to the game's main story. Once you wake up back in bed, it seems like nothing has progressed, so you head downstairs and try to leave. Your mom finally acknowledges you as you try to leave, and what she says to you is kind of a meta moment. Your mother says she was initially against you becoming a disker out of fear the family would suffer more. The implication here is that your father, completely absent from the story, has been dead for a while. During the whole game, the player character has never been able to talk with a mom as an NPC. The reason your mom was too focused on the TV wasn't out of negligence, but pretending to be aloof when you would go out and potentially put yourself in danger. If you've been around Pokemon as long as I have, no doubt you've seen the fan speculation about the lack of fathers in Pokemon games, as well as questioning the parents' decision-making and allowing their kids to roam the wilderness alone with dangerous monsters. Such tropes have been memed to death for nearly 20 years now, so I think it's a brilliant bit of writing from SATTO that not only references this old trope, but rewrites it in a way that's tragic yet sympathetic. Your dad is gone because he's likely dead, and your mom is still coping and pretends not to worry about you. Again, Disc Creatures wears its inspirations on its sleeve. After this, there's a bit more philosophizing from our unknown speaker from the very beginning of the game, who likes to break the fourth wall, and then credits. From this point on, the player is in what's often referred to in games as the postgame, meaning the main part of the game is done and the remaining portion consists of activities to be enjoyed or achievements to accomplish. It helps to continue replayability after a game is technically over and is a common feature in many RPGs. There is an official story episode called the EX episode. The legendary creatures of the game are found through this episode, and despite how significant it is for game challenge, the scale of the world, and player accomplishment, the questline itself is rather simple. To begin, a creature called Conductor seeks a music-appreciating, strong human to meet up with. You can find him in the Juglin Woods, and he immediately battles you to test your skills. After defeating him and proving yourself, he tells you the story of Fang'an and how it sacrificed its freedom to prevent some unknown disaster from harming mankind. Conductor seeks to free Fang'an from its sealed prison inside Mount Azel. This requires collecting the powers of 3 legendary dragon creatures of fire, water, and grass typings in order to break the 3 seals of those same elements. Conductor gives you an ancient flute, which can be used to summon each dragon once you find their lair. After giving you their locations, you're sent on your way, free to find each dragon. Poseidon, the water dragon, if you'll remember, is also inside Mount Azel. Pyroclassus is at the end of the lava segment from episode 4, and Heteras can be found if you can successfully find the correct path through Juglin Maze. If you're familiar with Pokemon, it's analogous to the common legendary trio that accompanies the Mage Legendary of most Pokemon games. They can be hard fights, with passive buffs to creatures of their typing and negative effects to every other type. Alongside them are allied creatures who can dish out extra damage or buff the dragon. Bringing creatures of the same type as them isn't a bad idea. Once the 3 are defeated and the seal is broken, you can make your way to Fang'an's chamber and enter the open portal. Inside is what appears to be a pocket dimension filled with floating rocky debris. Fang'an appears up ahead, and outside of video game final boss necessity, I'm not exactly sure why you battle. You were sent there to free Fang'an, but you battle. Nonetheless, after defeating it, the dimension seems to grow unstable, causing you to fall from your rock bridge. I believe Fang'an flies down and saves you, but it could also be that falling just ejected you from the dimension and Fang'an followed you. Either way, Fang'an is free and your Cinderace is here to see you home. The 2 of you watch Fang'an disappear, but as you leave, a recipe is dropped for you. Fang'an's recipe. Another bit of dialogue from the previously mentioned unknown narrator pops up, and finally I can talk about my theory on this. Based on the language used throughout these little moments, from the very beginning of the game to the one before the main credits, and the one we just saw before the postgame credits, I believe the speaker has been Fangun all along. There are multiple references made to our and your world, which I think refers to the creature and human metaphorical worlds. These two groups were apart for God knows how long, and the events of the game are dealing with the overlap of these two worlds. If not Fangun, then it could just be dialogue from SATTO himself, referring to the game world and our own real world. Overall, I don't think it's terribly important, it's just that most aspects of this game seem meticulously designed, so it's obviously there for a thought-out reason. So there we have it, that's the complete story. In terms of pure story, this is all there is in the game. All that's left now is to talk about the remaining post-game activities. Considering again that Disc Creatures is a solo developed game, I can't help but be impressed by the inclusion of post-game activities at all, and I'm not just talking about the post-game EX episode either. The post-game activities include the Disc Coliseum, the Under the Clock dungeon and boss, post-game exclusive Discer battles and NPC interactions, and collecting every creature to fill out your PC decks, but this should be obvious. The Disc Coliseum is a newly opened building that sits right above Lyceum Town. You'll have passed by its uncompleted frame many times during the main game. Again, the influence of Pokemon is undeniable. The Disc Coliseum more or less is a battle tower, which most Pokemon fans are likely familiar with. For those who somehow don't know, it's a gauntlet of NPC battles at the level cap of 50, with increasing rewards the further you go in an undefeated streak. Your reward is a special currency, basically just BP from Pokemon. It's called Disc Credits. You can spend these on equipment for your creatures, trade them for Pico, but most importantly, spend them on rare creature discs. The creatures you can buy from the rewards desk include the starters, all of the possible super rare creatures from Mr. Discer, and several Disc Coliseum exclusive creatures including Landtalk and Porka. These rare discs have a pretty high cost, and depending how well you perform, getting all of them can be a lengthy goal. My current save file has 136 hours on it, and I began the Disc Coliseum grind somewhere around the 40-hour mark. Personally, I didn't go into the strategy of it too much, nor did I make use of the reincarburation, so it took a lot longer than I feel it would have for someone else. Time in between was also spent raising new teams and trying out new creatures in the Coliseum. Mostly, I just wanted to get through the grind as relentlessly as possible. I was able to get lucky with a few Mr. Discer pulls, so all in all I would say I spent about 70-ish hours purely battling in the Disc Coliseum. There are several factors in the Disc Coliseum that can make your time there easier or harder. For starters, Disc Credit rewards start off very small and compound slowly. If you can get above 10 or 11 victories in a row, each subsequent victory really begins to jump up in terms of the credits you get per battle. This means you are heavily rewarded for getting far, to the point where one successful run of say 20 victories can eclipse the rewards of a run of 5 victories several fold. I was fortunate enough to ask SATTO himself about the exact formula of how disc credits are rewarded, and without going into the exact mathematics, it's essentially like this. Essentially, when under 10 wins in a streak, every 2 to 3 wins raises a value that compounds to increase your rewards. After 10 wins, a different equation altogether is used, which gives noticeable increases to the amount of credits you get after every win. Obviously, battles get increasingly difficult the higher your streak, but you're allowed to fully heal a single creature between each battle, and any defeated creatures of yours are revived with 1 HP. Around every 6 or 7 battles, you'll have what I call a mercy round, where you fight less threatening creatures as a way of catching up on lost health. Another factor is the RNG inherent to the battles you'll have. There aren't any preset teams or any real theming to the creatures that you'll fight, it's all completely random. The only constants are that they'll often have individually helpful items equipped, and that they're all max level. Some of the random creatures you can encounter include the 3 legendary dragons, Scourgehan, and Fangun itself. The inclusion of these incredibly powerful creatures is something I have a problem with. The problem isn't with challenge or balance, as you can easily take out those creatures by focusing them down. My problem lies with the consistency of world building. Heteras, Pyroclastus, Poseidon, Scourgehan, and Fangun are all unique encounters. With the exception of maybe Scourgehan, the player character should realistically be the only one with access to the recipes and discs for these legendary creatures. How the Disc Coliseum came to get their own copies, I have no idea, and to my knowledge, it's never explained. Some people might not consider this a big deal, but I did find it annoying to have to fight multiple Fanguns in the Coliseum when the only recipe is in my possession, and I hadn't even had a Fangun disc of my own yet. In fact, if you aren't particularly lucky with the gacha, part of getting a Fangun directly involves grinding disc credits in the Coliseum itself. Another post-game activity is an entirely new dungeon known as Under the Clock. Remember that strange plant-like clock sitting in the middle of Lyceum Town? It's right under that. The only way to open it is to have a team of creatures with ground, water, or grass types. Inside you'll find a long dungeon filled with various high-level grass creatures, as well as a mining minigame with a couple rare creatures to find. It's a tough dungeon. On top of having high-level creatures to fight with access to powerful attacks, you are forced to enter with potentially multiple type disadvantages. You have to complete the dungeon and beat this boss in a disadvantageous state. I found it to be a lot of fun personally, and a few of the creatures found inside can ease your suffering with their secondary typings. The boss Glenphasia can accurately be described as one of the hardest bosses in the game. It wants to rule over the surface, so of course you have to stop it. The boss's minions constantly refreshing the earth and bounty buffs can turn Glenphasia into a tanky enemy to bring down. Remember how I said using the same element the enemy has is entirely viable? In this dungeon, it's an advantage. When you're fighting fire with fire, so to speak, there is no same type resistance, and you'll be able to mitigate the inherent type disadvantage you're forced into to unlock this place. Defeating Glenphasia saves the town and nets you the boss's recipe. Overall, a great inclusion in my opinion. It's a challenge, it's creative, and it adds some meaty content to the postgame. This isn't a very large point, but after the postgame period starts, you'll be able to do a couple of rematches and Discre battles. The rewards for these are exclusive fusion recipes, so if you want to 100% your collection, you'll want to seek them out. Toma, the Tomati-obsessed man, is willing to have a tomato creature-only rematch with you, and when defeated, he gives you the Tomatinator recipe. That whole point about certain creatures basically being outclassed by others really clicked for me in this fight because wow, Tomati's high-level move pool is atrocious compared to other high-level grass types, including King Tomate. Another rematch is against the type tutorial guy above Juggling Woods, except this time he's got all max-level creatures. It can be a damn struggle if you've only got a few max-level creatures, since there will always be an element or two you'll be weak against. I honestly had to raise a couple extra creatures to max just to beat all his challenges. After that arduous process, he rewards you with a Big Hand recipe, a counterpart to his Bigfoot recipe reward from earlier. Near the type tutorial man is another battle, a Discre using a Brachia. It's simple, defeat him and he'll give you the Brachia recipe. What makes this creature so special is that it has the highest energy pool in the whole game. If you return to Dr. Grape's lab, you'll find a recipe for Scourgeon. The description says it was left behind for a true Discre. I'm not really sure if Aubrey survived or not, or where the doctor's whereabouts are right now, but I assume he left in shame, but believes we can put such a dark recipe to good use. It could hit that theme of doing good with something created for wickedness. I wonder if the sequel will provide any closure. There are other little minor secrets, minigames, and activities other than what I've covered here, and most are not strictly delegated to the postgame, but I like to move on to the final conclusion. Overall, from a purely visionary to execution angle, Disc Creatures is a well-crafted game. Being a solo developer offers a lot of personal freedom with one's passions. No marketing team or investors to breathe down your neck. SATTO clearly put an insane amount of passion and polish into this game. For the most part, its mechanics, systems, writing, presentation, and other aspects are well put together. Of course, there are issues, but very few are actually obstructive. From looking at the timeline of updates, there seem to be a few patched bugs, but at least in my playtime, the only bug I saw was a minor text box error. This happened only twice in almost 200 hours of playtime. I'm not sure how much of this stability can be credited to the RPG Maker engine itself, but as a standalone product, Disc Creatures was incredibly stable. The game systems like stats, elements, moves, and item management are all based in a long and similar RPG history, but what SATTO did add to the formula is well thought out. The elemental system is quite balanced and mostly based in logic with a few curveballs. In fact, the majority of tools the player has are useful, and variables within combat the player might encounter are very balanced. The clear exception, of course, is taking advantage of type weaknesses and E-charging openings, but SATTO obviously intended that combination to be a cornerstone of the combat system. Considering how many values and variables stat-based RPGs have by nature, I think few could deny the success of Disc Creatures when it comes to objective functionality. The writing or story of the game is quite silly at times, and definitely falls into common tropes in some moments, but overall seems at least competent. Some of these tropes include examples like villains monologuing about their plans, or the player character being saved in Deus Ex Machina. Considering how much focus is on the gameplay, I'm not sure how much the writing quality really matters, but that's all up to player taste. Events do mostly progress with a believable logic, and the characters and bosses do act in a believable manner, even if their motivations are explained last minute. The only major flaw in the story is the final main story episode regarding Dr. Grape's sudden change to villain, as discussed previously. For those Pokemon fans who have been pining for a more mature game, I think you'll appreciate certain aspects of Disc Creature's story. As I said, the game mostly has a whimsical atmosphere. However, there are moments of genuine maturity and sometimes even a darker tone. I've said before how certain examples of NPC dialogue seem very adults, or at least relatable to adults. The moments of genuine danger, sometimes even death as we saw with Suts, are handled tastefully and without unnecessary edginess or exploitation. Similar to the mature moments of the story, Disc Creatures was developed with veteran expectations in mind, at least in terms of quality of life. It's obvious through game elements like the Move Changer and Grove Stove, SATTO wanted to make changing your team around smoother. Stopping the Grove Stove at level 15 is a serious inconsistency, obstructive to the intention of the restaurant's inclusion, and I hope it's addressed in the sequel. If such a hard cap is going to be present, I ask that it stops at a higher level. If the player can afford it monetarily, make it so swapping out creatures for a new party member is possible on a whim. Aside from these issues, the game is overall very well made. Being made by one person who did all of the sprite work, designing and tweaking of the mechanics, music, writing, and other aspects is seriously impressive. SATTO had to work in so many different creative fields to make this game. Considering how well it turned out with so many things to juggle, SATTO must be an incredibly talented and passionate developer. Moving on to the personal conclusion, with some relief, I can now finally unleash the floodgate and just gush about this game to my heart's content. It might be obvious to many over the course of this dive into Disc Creatures, but I really love this game. From the first moment where it caught my eye on the Steam catalog to the moment where I completed the Dex equivalent, it was overall such a goddamn great time. The fact that one passionate person can make something so full of soul and charm all by themselves is honestly so mind-blowing and impressive that I find it easy to look past the few flaws it has. From the dungeon and exploration, to the creatures, to the music, to the game's visuals, everything is so charming. In an industry of bland open worlds, profit margins, microtransaction, and design appealing to the lowest common denominator, it is immensely satisfying and nourishing to my soul to find something niche, made with passion, and hits upon many aspects of my gaming taste. Monster Tamers are already a niche subgenre outside of the most popular franchises. Even many of the new indie ones are still in development, early access, being kickstarted, forgotten, or just generally yet to be finished. Finding a simple, complete gem of a game made by one talented individual is such a good feeling. If I have any sort of narrative to sell you on in this video, it is that Disc Creatures is seriously impressive and I cannot recommend it enough. This recommendation is doubly so for the type of player who has an appreciation for old RPGs, particularly a fan of Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal, as well as any Monster Tamers. However, I do think on its own, Disc Creatures stands solidly of its own quality, so please don't reduce it to merely a nostalgia game like so many game journalists do. At full price, the game by itself is $14.99, which in my opinion seems quite fair. I got it during a Steam sale for around $7. Considering how much time I've put into this game, as well as the enjoyment I've gotten out of it, it has been well worth the already inexpensive price tag. I've been working on this review on and off for over a year now, and I hope the dedication to this video is evidence enough of how I really feel about this game. I cannot help but feel passionately that Disc Creatures is a game deserving of more recognition. At time of writing, SATTO is currently working on the sequel game, Disc Creatures World, and has been posting regular updates about its development on Twitter. So far, I like what I see a lot, and it seems like a more colorful game that brings the creatures to life through more animation and the overworld. I await its arrival with love and excitement. That's pretty much all I have to say on Disc Creatures for now, so I'll close out this video with an update about what you can expect in the future. If you're only here for Disc Creatures, there's no shame in closing out now, but if you could stick around to hear me out, I'd really appreciate it. As I've said before, this video has taken an incredibly long time to make, and it's a project I've never taken this much time to complete. I hate to leave things unfinished, and part of that is my own stubbornness for sure. Footage collection, outlining, and the first draft of the script took about 11 months to finish. RPGs are often quite long games, as I said previously, so a lengthy review process is to be expected. On top of juggling work, life, and other creative hobbies, making YouTube content like this is a huge undertaking. I don't plan to stop with just this video either, so I just ask for your patience and understanding. As the first real video on this channel, obviously the channel is a newborn babe and will have to remain as a hobby for now. If feasible, I would gladly make it my job if I could. Perhaps that is naive, arrogant, or ambitious of me to dream of, but I'd like to be transparent about my goals for this channel. I'm not going to stop unless my passion runs out or something crazy happens in life. For me, art is the truly metaphysical activity of living. It is my biggest reason to exist, and because of that, life is truly enjoyable for me. Regardless of financial excess, I'll always be doing something with my time, even if all you ever know of my existence is a disembodied voice in a video talking about raising fictional monsters. In a spirit of genuine, heartfelt humility, if you enjoy what I'm doing, please do subscribe to this channel, or follow me, or whatever. It would be an empowering encouragement to tangibly see others enjoying the things I make. Released alongside this video is also a proper length intro that goes in depth about my experience, tastes, influences, and plans for this channel. I've included it because when analyzing and critiquing media, I think it's important to understand the speaker's taste, so you can get a hint of what they value in that media. You can watch that video as well if you'd like, but to quickly recap points I've made in that real introduction, I've been playing games in the monster tamer genre for as long as I can remember. It began with Pokemon and Monster Rancher, two franchises I still hold dear to my heart. Over the years, I have branched into many other franchises like Digimon, Spectrobes, Shin Megami Tensei, Fossil Fighters, and the subject of this video. There are many more games out there I consider favorites outside of this genre, including Team Fortress 2, decent number of Final Fantasy titles, including 14, Dark Souls, Smash Brothers, a few CRPGs including Planescape Torment and Underrail, and others. They aren't exactly relevant to this video, but I'm just throwing them out there so you all understand my taste a little bit more. It helps to give some humanity towards my disembodied YouTube voice. At time of writing, I'm not sure which game to tackle next. Since the DX release of Monster Rancher 1 and 2, I was thinking of doing the Nexus Analysis review on Monster Rancher 1, but also Cerealim Ultimate is officially out by now, and that one caught my eye. I don't know, maybe I'll do a Twitter poll if this video takes off at all. A question I can imagine being asked is, why start your channel with a game almost no one has heard of? After a long deliberation, I would answer that it's a game I have a lot of passionate feelings towards. It's not a game discussed in depth enough by 10-minute reviewers, and again, I believe it is a game deserving of more exposure. 2020 and 2021 were a hotbed of new monster taming indie games. So I don't think I could keep up with them like another creator I follow, known as Gym Leader Ed, does. His format lends itself more towards first impressions and news, so I must be choosy with the kind of games I want to review, especially given the extensive time it's taken to even make this one. At any rate, whatever I cover next will be something I'm interested in, so stay tuned. If you stuck around this far, words cannot accurately express how much I appreciate it. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. I'll see you around. Bye-bye. I have to pause because my cat is pooping and scraping litter everywhere. Pyroclastus is at the end of the logma balls.